June 14, 2019. A remote stretch of desert outside Roswell, New Mexico. I woke with a pressure in my chest, like someone had hands on either side of my rib cage, and a light that felt wrong glowing through the thin curtain of the camper window. I had spent most of my adult life on the road and in odd places, doing repair work on telecom towers and remote sensors, so I know the difference between a real threat and a trick of the mind. That is why the unease I felt that morning lodged in me like a stone. The sound I had heard before waking was not wind or wildlife. It was a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated the teeth and made the hair along my arms stand up. I said nothing then, because the silence of the desert at dawn already felt watchful, and I wanted to be careful with words. Later, I would learn that being cautious with words was not enough. I had been in the Southwest for 8 years, working on cell sites and satellite ground equipment. My name is Daniel Ruiz. I was 38 at the time and lived alone most months, moving from project to project. My backstory starts in a neighborhood in El Paso, where, as a kid, I took apart radios until my mother made me put them back together. I grew into a job that required a steady hand and a practical mind. I married once in my early 20s to Annie, who worked nights at a hospital and whose laugh could cut through any argument. The marriage did not last. I learned how to sleep in noisy truck stops and how to trust my instincts in strange places. By my late 20s, I worked long days climbing steel and nights reading satellite manuals trying to understand orbital signatures. That training taught me how to interpret a blinking light on an instrument the same way a cardiologist reads an EKG. It taught me to measure sensation and to catalog nuance. But it did not prepare me for the night a formation of lights moved above me and then something left a mark beside the road. We were on site near a cattle crossing at County Road 9, where the ground opens into scrub and salt flat. I had been there with my teammate Mark Lewis and 2 contractors from a local company, Maria Chen and Thomas Reed. We had camped in a rented camper van because the job required an early start. The night before, after the gear check and a beer around a low fire, Mark and I talked about instrumentation and a recent MUFON thread that speculated about electromagnetic interference near old ranches. Thomas joked about reading alien romance novels on the job, and Maria scrolled through satellite images on her tablet, showing me odd heat signatures along the county border. By midnight, the sky was a dark bowl of stars. The desert had that sharp, cold air. That feels like someone has trimmed the air with a knife. Then the light started. At first it felt like a trick of headlights on the highway miles away, but the formation peeled away from the horizon and hovered in a column of 6 amber points, evenly spaced like lanterns on a string. There was no engine sound, no rotor wash from a helicopter, nothing mechanical. Mark whispered what we all were thinking. Are those drones? Maria turned the tablet toward me and zoomed on a live feed from a road camera. The lights did not register as conventional craft. Thomas laughed nervously, then stopped when the laughter did not fill the air. I felt the hairs on my neck pull taut. That physical sensation of being observed arrived in a way I had felt only once before, on top of an antenna mast in a thunderstorm. The light had weight and intent. The first major scene happened when those lights descended and the van electronics went weird. The conversation that followed was long and tense and shows how ordinary people handle something extraordinary. There are 6 clear exchanges in this scene and more short comments after. I said quietly, "Turn off the generator." Mark said, "I already cut it. What was that on the tablet?" Marita said, "It shows a cluster, but no transponder, none." Thomas said, "Maybe it is some kind of weather drone. We saw that in Lubbock once." I said, "Weather drones make noise and have reflectors. Those did not." Mark said, "Then call it in. Call somebody. Officer Holloway is on shift in Roswell, right?" I said, "I called him earlier about a permit. His number is in my contacts." Maria said, "My app is reading a spike in the local magnetometer. I have a log." Thomas said, "My phone just lost signal." I said, "Mine too. Keep calm, stay together, and get a visual." Officer James Holloway would arrive later that night, but not before we had more than words. During the exchange, we stepped outside into a wash of cold light, and the sky seemed to reorganize. The air smelled faintly of ozone and sage, and the ground under our boots thrummed like a bass string. The sensory details piled up in my memory. The metallic aftertaste in my mouth, the grit of sand in the camper door seam, the taste of coffee gone cold in the styrofoam cup on the dash, the fine vibration that crawled up my legs. I could hear a thin, high whooping that was not wind and not an animal. I felt pressure on my temples and a softness in the way the night held us. That night, I touched the side of the road and it was warm, though the air was below freezing. Those contrasts made every step more uncanny. The first block of tension lasted long enough to change our behavior. We tried taking photos, and the images came out as blown whites, pixels smeared. Rail lines of color. Maria opened an app that logged magnetometer activity, and it spiked in 3 irregular bursts. Thomas, a contractor who fixed wiring in dairy farms, swore he felt static jump across his hand when he touched the van frame. At one point, Mark knelt and brushed away the salt crust from a patch of ground and found plant stems that looked singed in a perfect circular pattern. He said, voice small, "Whatever landed did not like what was growing here." The sight of that burned circle made my throat close. We were not dealing with a prank. We tried to make the situation practical. I walked the perimeter with a flashlight and a handheld EM meter. The reading jumped from background to a level that made the gauge needle flutter like a bird. Officer Holloway arrived an hour later with his cruiser lights off to avoid spooking anything. He is a man with a careful face and a tendency to listen first and then act. He introduced himself, then asked me directly, "What did you see?" I told him. He nodded and wrote notes in a small pad. He later told me he had seen radial anomalies in other reports, but never with a heat signature and never with a human witness so close. He called dispatch and left a log. He also asked to see our photos and to take a soil sample. He took a small vial and placed a tape over the sample and told me he would send it to the county lab. That action felt like a tether to normal procedure, and I clung to it. The second major moment of tension came when one of the lights swooped down and what we all described later as a beam or column touched the road. The scene lasted minutes but seemed endless. For a while my mind split between cataloging details and protecting everyone with me. I remember distinctly the smell shifting from sage to something electric and wet like copper wire in rain. My hands shook. Mark reached for my shoulder, and I felt him at once, hot with adrenaline. Maria whispered, "Do not stare into it." Someone had said that somewhere, maybe a film, and the words landed like advice. Thomas, pale, took a step forward despite the tremor in his knees, and then sat hard when the light shifted away. The beam moved like a slow finger of a clock, and the ground under it sizzled. The tension was thick, and then thicker. That second tension required 2 short paragraphs because it changed our decisions. I decided we could not stay. We packed quickly, all of us silent in that precise way people are when they do not want to break an arrangement with reality. Officer Holloway suggested we go to the station to write a formal statement and to protect our equipment. He drove slowly with lights low and radio muted. Back at a patched fluorescent table in a classroom of the Roswell Sheriff's Station, we gave our accounts, and the deputy on duty, Sarah Carver, took careful notes. Sarah is a small woman with quick eyes and a fondness for details. She asked for timelines and for any apps used. Maria handed over the tablet logs. Thomas handed a small bit of charred plant law to the evidence bin. Mark went outside and stood in the parking lot with a cigarette but did not light it. We each filed a report with MUFON online the next morning and uploaded our images. I wrote a narrative in the comment box, using the words observation, magnetometer spike, and circular scorch. The MUFON intake asked for coordinates, and I supplied the County Road 9 marker and the GPS from my truck. Shortly after, Dr. Elena Rivera from the university in Albuquerque emailed me because someone on a local forum had flagged our images for her review. Dr. Rivera is a physicist who had been working on low-energy transients in geomagnetic data, and she wanted to examine our logs. She asked for permission to analyze the magnetometer output and the soil sample. I gave it. She wrote back within 2 days with preliminary notes about anomalous conductivity localized to the scorch ring. That small email felt like a confirmation that something measurable had occurred. The days after were a mix of practical investigation and a creeping change in how I moved. I spoke with Officer Holloway 3 times, with Sarah at the station once more, with Dr. Rivera 2 times on video, and with a reporter named Lucas Reed from a local paper who wanted a soundbite. Lucas came to our motel and sat across from me with a recorder and a polite skepticism. I told him the facts, the sensations, the smell, and the way the lights aligned. I told him about Mark and Maria and Thomas and how they all had the same shiver of recognition when they replayed the moment. I said that I had felt observed and that I still felt a shadow when I drove past that road. Lucas wrote an article that printed the basic facts and quoted Officer Holloway. The story brought other people forward. Within a week, 3 other locals called the sheriff to report strange lights along County Road 9. A farmer named Walter Jennings said he heard low whooping and found a ring of flattened hay. A nurse named Angela Morales reported her dog refusing to go outside for 2 nights after seeing a bright column. A teenager named Sarah Boone sent a shaky video shot from a pickup truck that captured a smear of white light and a sudden loss of radio. Those names became part of the fabric of the event. Each person had a specific action. Walter brought photographs. Angela came to the station to speak in person. Sarah uploaded her clip to the forum and tagged Dr. Rivera. A second narrative unfolded 1 month later. In another county, when a family who lived near a private helipad in Pecos called me after reading the article. They saw 6 amber lights again, hovering low and then aligning over a dry wash. The family members were David, his wife Maria Lopez, and their teenage son Jose. David phoned and spoke to me at length, and his account mirrored our formation of lights, and the same magnetometer spike recorded by a neighbor running an amateur radio. I spoke to David for more than an hour, and his wife Maria cried softly on the line, describing a sensation of nausea and a ringing in her ears that lasted days. Jose showed me photos of a circular print in the dirt. The overlap made me realize we were not isolated. We tried to be scientific. Dr. Rivera came out to Roswell 2 weeks after the event. She collected the soil sample from the scorch ring and ran portable spectroscopy. She found traces of rare earth metal concentrations slightly above background and an unusual pattern of microfractures on plant stems consistent with rapid heating. Her report was cautious and published in an online preprint with measured language but clear data. That gave us a language to talk about what might have been physical. Dr. Rivera also asked me to preserve the tablet logs and to send her raw files from Maria Chen. I did because I wanted clarity, and because a scientist looking at data made the whole thing feel less like a private hallucination and more like an event with signatures. We also attempted to document behavioral change. My sleep altered. I had vivid dreams of light and being lowered through a long white tunnel. Mark said he could not stand a certain frequency of refrigerator hum anymore and had to sleep in earplugs. Maria stopped taking the tablet into the field for a week because the app would crash unpredictably. Thomas began carrying an EM meter in his pocket the way some men carry lucky coins. Small public reactions ramped up. Lucas posted follow-up pieces, and a local radio interviewer, Jenna Park, had me on the air. People called and texted with their own stories. Some blamed satellites or secret military craft. Officer Holloway stayed measured and said publicly that the sheriff office had no conclusive evidence for illegal aircraft or for any crime. Now I need to place the CTA for comments because community recollection matters, and this was the point where the thread garnered real responses. If you are watching this and you felt anything like we did, tell us in the comments. I understand skepticism. I have trained myself to doubt and to seek measurement first. What I can promise is that I felt the sensation physically and that I tried everything to record it. If you have a similar experience, tell us in a short line starting with "I saw," followed by when and where, and what sound or light you remember. Your note might seem small, but it helps map patterns. If you have a photo, include coordinates and whether you filed a formal report with a local agency or with MUFON. Those short data points help researchers like Dr. Rivera look for correlations. Please be respectful in the comments. We need thoughtful witnesses, not sensationalists. Now I will return to the chronology and show the final measurements and the things that still do not make sense. One of the more perplexing elements was the way memory fragmented after the encounter. In my case, a period of maybe 20 minutes is hazy. I can recall the beam touching the road, but not what I thought about at the precise second. Mark remembers his watch stopped and that the hands spun oddly when the light passed overhead. Maria recorded a timestamp on her tablet and later said the clock jumped 13 minutes. Thomas found small abrasions on his forearm that were not there before, and later the county clinic nurse, Angela Morales, said she noticed a faint circular scar on her palm after seeing a light near her house. Those physical aftereffects became evidence in themselves, and they altered how we treated the memory. There were legal and social consequences too. Lucas Reed, who wrote the article, received pushback from local ranchers who worried about tourists trespassing. Walter Jennings reported unknown vehicles by his gate 3 nights after his sighting. Officer Holloway filed an internal note about an uptick in calls, and the Sheriff Deputy Sarah Carver raised the issue at a county meeting. The county decided to place a camera along County Road 9 for 3 months to track unusual activity. The camera captured several lights that were at first similar, but none produced the same magnetometer signature or soil scorch. The footage was grainy, but it made a public archive. Dr. Rivera used that footage as part of a dataset and published a cautious analysis that suggested low-altitude electromagnetic events localized in time and space. 2 particular moments of tension defined how I felt for months. The first was the night the camera footage showed an unexplained brightness, and my phone vibrated at 3 a.m. with a string of texts from Maria exclaiming that her dog would not leave the grooming room. I drove out and found her porch light smashed and a shallow circular print by the fence. The second was at the clinic when Thomas returned with new abrasions and a headache so severe he could not remember simple words. Those memories are sharp, and I revisit them often. Each time I describe them, I replay the smell of metal and the taste of salt, and the way the silence afterwards pressed into conversation. After months of inquiries, there were no definitive answers. The lab reported odd metallic concentrations but called them inconclusive. The sheriff said there was no evidence of criminal action, and the MUFON case remained open with multiple public comments and a few similar reports from neighbors. Along the county line, Dr. Rivera continued to collect data and to ask for more files. Officer Holloway kept a log of calls and told me privately he had never seen a consistent pattern like ours. He also admitted he hesitated before filing the soil sample because he did not want to open a flood of speculation. Those institutional hesitations became their own kind of answer. They tell you what is socially allowed to be investigated and what is left to the fringe. The epilogue comes in 3 parts and shows how the event changed things over time. 1 month after the encounter, I found myself driving past County Road 9 and physically slowing my car, though nothing was there. Mark and I both received an email from a hobbyist named Paul Turner who had been cataloging strange lights in the region and who offered to share a set of night vision clips. Paul drove out and spent a night with us taking notes, and his footage registered a soft glow that matched our descriptions. He sent me the files and I backed them up in 3 different drives. 3 months later, Maria Chen had moved on to another contractor job, but she messaged often and said she had stopped seeing strange lights in her phone because she avoided that stretch of highway at night. Thomas reported a slight ringing in his ears that a local ENT, Dr. Samuel Klein, suggested could be residual from brief electromagnetic exposure. Dr. Klein filed a small report. 6 months on, Officer Holloway retired from patrol but kept a map of all the calls he had ever logged and placed our County Road 9 entry in a folder titled Unusual. The folder was small and mostly empty. I kept going to work, fixing transmitters, climbing towers that now felt less lonely because they were only steel and wind. I also kept the memory of the light and the scorch ring and the paper lab reports and the MUFON file number. I do not pretend to have all the answers. I can present dates, names, and measurements, and mouths. I can show you the soil analysis from Dr. Rivera and the camera footage, and I can map the ring on satellite images where the vegetation pattern shifts. I can also offer the human record. Mark Lewis, who once made me laugh about conspiracies, now checks his watch before he sleeps. Maria Chen sent a message last week saying she sometimes dreams of grids of amber points and wakes with the taste of copper on her tongue. Thomas says he clenches his jaw at night and has started sleeping with earplugs. Officer James Holloway still tells me to call if anything odd happens, though he warns to expect paperwork. Dr. Elena Rivera continues to be cautious and curious. Walter Jennings still discourages strangers at his gate, and Angela Morales keeps her dog inside after dusk. If you have seen anything like this, please consider filing a report.
Short report and tagging MUFON and local authorities. If you have raw data, share it with researchers like Dr. Rivera. If you are near County Road 9, check the satellite imagery and note any circular anomalies. If you live in New Mexico or nearby and saw lights in June 2019 or similar formations since then, tell us where and when and what you felt. The community of witnesses matters more than ever. I started documenting because I wanted to know if what we saw was unique and because I wanted others to feel less alone. There is a strange clarity in sharing facts. There is also a strange ambiguity that remains. In the end, I have facts and feelings and measurements and names. I have Mark, Maria, Thomas, Officer Holloway, Dr. Elena Rivera, Walter Jennings, Angela Morales, Lucas Reed, and Sarah Carver, each doing their part to anchor what happened in something reportable. I have data on a soil sample, a camera log, and a MUFON case. I have a memory of being watched under a column of amber lights and a physical scorch ring on the ground. I do not have a neat explanation. I only have this record and the hope that more witnesses will add their pieces. If nothing else, I have learned to listen to the weight in the air and to trust that some sensations demand documentation. I do not have all the answers, only this memory and the files that might one day point to something larger. If you want to follow the investigation, subscribe and check the description for links to the MUFON case files, Dr. Rivera preprint, and the gallery of images. I do not know what was watching us. I only know that we were watched and that the world felt different afterward.